Hello class, and this is IS 303, and we're going to take a look at the password problem. And we'll start with this little cartoon here. You can obviously see the pun on the sign here, fishing license. And of course, this would indicate that this particular type of fishing is not exactly legal. So let's look at your case. You're the new CIO at Invesco Securities Firm. Okay, as the name implies, this is a firm that in the financial industry that handles securities. Now, the CEO's secretary was tricked into giving his password over the phone to someone she thought was in the IT department. She knew the CEO's password because it was the same one that he uses for his Facebook account. As far as the IT staff can determine, the hacker probably did not use the stolen password. However, if the thief had gotten in, he would potentially have had access to all of the extensive client data. Now, there is an existing 3-year-old security and password policy. Some of the longer-term employees remember the security training that occurred back then, but there's been no training since the old policy was put in place. The password policy was strengthened 2 years ago so that passwords had to be longer, they couldn't be reused, and they had to be changed monthly. Following that change, an intern was hired to help reset passwords when employees and clients couldn't remember their password. Your goal for this case, using the information that you've learned from the assigned text reading, you are going to identify the problems with the existing security at Invesco. Secondly, you're going to then craft a security policy and implementation and maintenance plan that addresses those problems while striking a balance between security and accessibility. A balance there is absolutely necessary. If you make it so secure that you restrict accessibility, then people start looking for shortcuts and ways around security measures. On the other hand, you can make it totally accessible, but it's not going to be very secure. So you have to maintain that balance. So let's look at a couple of problems here with passwords. Matt Honan was hacked for his Twitter handle. Salting is a form of password encryption that involves appending a password to a given username and then hashing the new string of characters. Then there's hashing, which is transforming a string of characters into a usually shorter fixed length value or key that represents the original string. Hashing is used to index and retrieve passwords. You would have read about multi-factor authentication. And of course, there's, security questions. There's all the way to biometrics. In the text, you read about password managers. You read about phishing, keyloggers, dictionary attack, brute force, social engineering, aggressive password policies, weak passwords and password reuse, and then password dumps. So all of these are going to be things that you're going to need to be familiar with from the text before you begin your case analysis. So let's take a look at your questions. In the security breach described in the case story, which was our first slide, there are several types of security problems. Using this list below, identify how each item in the list shows up in the case. So basically, this is like a 6-part question. Employee training problems. Okay, identify how that shows up in this case. And for each of the problems, you're going to tie it back to the case and explain why it's a problem. And you can do this in your structured white space. The second part, employee or company operating process and procedure problems. So identify how that shows up in this case and explain why it's a problem. Next, need for a better password policy for employees. Again, identify how that shows up in the case and explain why it's a problem. Next, need for a data retention policy. You're going to do the same thing with that. Need for a data access policy. Same thing with that. And need for intrusion detection prevention measures. And you'll do the same thing for that. You're going to do the same thing for each one of these. So hopefully that should be, and your claim, just to further clarify, your claim can be what the problem was in the case that has to do with each item. And your support statement can then explain why it's a problem. And for good, strong support, you're going to want to explain why it was a problem in this case and why it's a problem in general. Okay, so hopefully everyone understands that. Let's look at your second part. You're going to choose a password policy to present to your boss, the CEO. Now, in your recommendation, be sure to address how it improves security and or accessibility. How would your recommended policy have helped the recent security breach? And you're going to identify at least one negative factor related to your recommendation. Now you've got some options here. Option A, stay with the current policy, but have everyone change his or her password. Send the CEO's secretary to training on recognizing social engineering and teach everyone how to craft better passwords. B, you can move to an aggressive password policy where strong passwords are required, weak passwords are prohibited, and users are required to change their password frequently. Provide everyone with a password manager so that people stop hoarding passwords. Passwords are compliant with the new aggressive rules, and strong passwords become disposable. C, you can keep the current password policy, but add in multi-factor authentication for every login. The additional factors may include an RSA token or a smartphone app, as well as the potential for biometrics and location-based limitations. And of course, that's where it accepts logins only from known locations. Or option D, you can craft your own password policy. Be sure that you provide details. And again, refer back to the question itself. Be sure to address how it improves security and/or accessibility. Explain how your recommended policy would have helped the recent security breach. And be sure to identify at least one negative factor related to your recommendation. So that, I believe, is the only 2 questions. Yes, it is. So hopefully you will have time to review everything. If you have any questions, log in for our virtual class meeting. Check your Canvas calendar or your schedule for the date and time. If you have questions and you know that you can't log in at that time, then send me an email and I will read that during the session and answer it. It will be recorded and posted. So thanks, everyone.